Wednesday, June 17th, the United States released the full text of a deal with Iran, a 14-point Memorandum of Understanding that could, in a war, reopen one of the world's most critical shipping lanes and put a nuclear program on ice. Or the whole deal could fall apart over the next 60 days. Here's the thing. We've been down this exact road before. In 2015, the world celebrated a landmark nuclear deal with Iran, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, better known as the JCPOA. Under this accord, Iran committed to dismantling significant portions of its nuclear infrastructure in exchange for sanctions relief. In 2018, in his first administration, President Trump walked away from it. Iran fired up its nuclear program, and earlier this year, we went to war. And now we're back at the negotiating table. Same country, same core issues, same promises. So, is this a real breakthrough, or are we going back to 2015 only to do it all over again with a different president's name on the cover? This is what we're breaking down today, and I promise you, by the end of this video, you will understand this deal better than most people who I've been talking to it about all week. I'll make it quick and non-technical. Welcome to Above the Noise, where I cover the latest news topics such as tech, AI, drones, and anything else shaping the world today. I try to break it down for regular people. No PhDs required. People who just want to know what's actually going on and how it affects their everyday life. No left or right spin, just the facts. Just telling the story based on the research I found. If my facts are not accurate, or if I'm misspoken in any way, just let me know in the comments below. Today, we're talking about the Islamabad MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding between the U.S. and Iran that was announced over the weekend and formally had its full text released to the public on Wednesday. We're going to cover what's actually in it and how it stacks up against Obama's 2015 JCPOA nuclear deal, where they're similar, where they're different, and whether this one is actually stronger. We'll finish with 3 things you need to watch closely over the next 60 days, because that's the window that will determine whether this deal becomes history or another headline that didn't hold. Let's start with the basics. What even is an MOU? Think of it like a term sheet when 2 businesses are negotiating a merger. You've agreed upon the big ideas, you've shaken hands, but the actual contract, the fine print, that comes later. That's what this is. It's not a treaty. It's a framework that says, here's what we've agreed to in principle. Now let's spend the next 60 days locking down the details. So here's what the 14-point document actually covers. Point 1, immediate and permanent end to military operations on all fronts, including Lebanon. The shooting stops tonight. That hasn't happened. More on that a little later. Point 2, the Strait of Hormuz reopens. This is a massive one. Before the war, roughly 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas moved through that narrow strip of water every single day. Iran shut it down. Energy markets felt it globally. Under this MOU, Iran commits to reopening the passage for commercial vessels immediately. Point 3, Iran gets sanctions relief right away. The U.S. Treasury issues waivers so Iran can begin selling oil again the moment this is signed. That is real, immediate economic relief for Tehran. Point 4, the U.S. lifts its naval blockade of Iranian ports within 30 days. Point number 5, this is the nuclear piece. Iran affirms it will never acquire or develop nuclear weapons. Both sides agree to negotiate what happens with Iran's existing stockpile of highly enriched uranium over the next 60 days. International nuclear inspectors from the IAEA are allowed back in Iran. Vice President Vance confirmed this week. Next up, point 6, the headline number that made a lot of people do a double take. The U.S. and its regional partners commit to a $300 billion, would that be, reconstruction fund for Iran. That is $300 billion. Now, whether that number has real structure behind it or it's a negotiating headline, that is one of the big questions we'll get to. But here's the critical thing to understand about this document. What it does not contain. It does not tell us exactly what Iran's nuclear program looks like after those 60 days. It doesn't specify enrichment levels. It doesn't count centrifuges. It doesn't detail where the highly enriched uranium goes or how it gets destroyed. All of that stuff, the stuff that actually determines whether this deal has teeth, is still being negotiated. And that brings us directly to the comparison everyone is making. How is this different from the 2015 JCPOA? In 2015, the Obama administration and 6 world powers, UK, France, Germany, Russia, and China, negotiated the JCPOA. And this was not a handshake agreement. This was a 159-page technical document. It told you exactly how much uranium Iran could enrich and at what purity. It capped it at 3.67%. It specifies how many centrifuges Iran could operate. It brought international inspectors in to verify everything in real time. And in exchange, Iran got sanctions lifted and access to billions in frozen assets. Now, the JCPOA had one well-known vulnerability: sunset clauses. A lot of those restrictions had expiration dates, 10 years here, 15 years there. Critics, including Trump, argued that essentially meant we were renting Iran's good behavior, and once the clock ran out, they could restart everything legally. Trump pulled the U.S. out in 2018. Iran then walked back its compliance and dramatically accelerated its uranium enrichment. And that chain of events is a big part of how we ended up in a shooting war in 2026. So, is this new deal actually better? Here's the honest breakdown. The similarities first, then the differences. The similarities are real and they matter. Both deals trade sanction relief and frozen assets for nuclear constraints. Both involve international inspectors going back in. Both leave the core tension intact. Iran wants economic relief right now. The West wants nuclear rollbacks first. And both have been politically controversial at home and abroad. Now the differences. I'll give you both sides of the argument because the truth is experts generally disagree. Difference number 1, no sunset clauses, in theory. The Trump administration says this deal has no expiration date on Iran's nuclear constraints. Iran simply cannot have a nuclear weapon ever. Supporters say that is a stronger commitment than the JCPOA. Critics say a permanent commitment is only as strong as the enforcement behind it, and we hadn't seen any enforcement details yet. Difference number 2, the scope. The JCPOA was narrowly focused on nuclear issues. This MOU covers a ceasefire, Lebanon, the Strait of Hormuz, reconstruction, regional security. Brother is either better because you're building more of a comprehensive peace, or it's riskier because there are more variables that can cause the whole thing to collapse. That brings us to difference number 3. And this is the one analysts keep coming back to. The nuclear details are not in this document. The JCPOA specified enrichment limits up front. This MOU schedules those specifics for the next 60 days of negotiations. Now, you can argue that's smart diplomacy. Get the ceasefire first, then work on the details. Or you can argue it's a vulnerability because Iran now has sanctions relief and open strait before the West has locked in verifiable nuclear constraints. Former President Obama said this week that he doubts any deal that comes out of this would be significantly different from the JCPOA. Trump, as you can believe, strongly disagrees. Where the truth lands will be determined what comes out of those technical negotiations. Wait, I know some of you are thinking, this is foreign policy stuff. Why does this actually affect me? Let me be very direct about that. Prices at the pump. Every time you fill up, this affects you. The Strait of Hormuz is the oil choke point of the world. 20% of the world's oil supplies flows through it, and every time it has been threatened or closed, energy prices have spiked globally. A genuine, sustained reopening stabilizes all that. You could see meaningful movement in energy prices within weeks if this agreement holds. Beyond that, an Iran that is reintegrating into the global economy, selling oil, receiving construction investment, has real incentives not to blow everything up again. That is a stabilizing force in a region that has disrupted global supply chains, financial markets, and security calculations for years. So here are the 3 things to watch closely over the next 60 days. Watch number 1. Does the Strait of Hormuz actually reopen smoothly? There are mines to clear. There's infrastructure to repair. Full restoration to pre-war shipping volumes could take time, and any incident in those waters could unravel things fast. Watch number 2. What does the nuclear technical negotiation actually produce? If Iran agrees to verifiable permanent constraints with real inspections, access, and a credible plan for that highly enriched uranium stockpile, this deal could genuinely exceed the JCPOA. If the details are vague, incomplete, or unenforceable, it's a weaker deal dressed up in stronger language. Security experts, intelligence agencies, and politicians from both sides of the aisle have all been skeptical of this agreement. Pay attention. And finally, that brings us to watch number 3. Israel. Israel was not part of this agreement. Israeli forces conducted strikes in Lebanon even after the MOU was announced. Prime Minister Netanyahu reportedly found out about the deal about the same time as the public, which tells you something about the tension between Washington and Jerusalem right now. If Israel takes actions that shatter the ceasefire before the 60 days are up, this entire framework is at risk. Here's the bottom line. The Islamabad MOU is the most significant diplomatic development in the Middle East in years. It stopped an active shooting war. It has the potential to reopen global energy flows, bring international nuclear inspectors back in, and build a framework for a lasting regional stability. That is genuinely meaningful. But it's not finished. The hardest questions, the nuclear verification details, the enforcement mechanisms, what Iran's enrichment program actually looks like after 60 days, those are still all ahead of us. The clock is running. And what happens in that window will determine whether or not this becomes a genuine historic agreement or another chapter in a long story of deals that did not hold. So here's my final thoughts. How does this continue to play out politically in Washington? Senior politicians from both sides of the aisle have already publicly criticized the agreement. Vice President Vance has already postponed a planned trip to Switzerland to begin direct talks with Iran. Stay tuned for updates. If you found this breakdown to be useful, hit that like button. It really does help more people find this content. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the follow-up as those technical negotiations unfold, because I will absolutely be covering it. And drop a comment below. Do you think this deal is actually stronger than the 2015 JCPOA? Or are we back at square one with a fresh coat of paint? I want to hear what you think. I'll see you in the next one. Stay curious, stay smart, and as always, stay above the noise.